Research includes topics such as teacher beliefs and application of the pedagogical context, knowledge, learning experience, and material designs, scaffolding students' higher order thinking, and practice of evidence-based learning. She has extensive experience in teaching K-12 classrooms and tertiary institutes in Australia and Sri Lanka. Ma'am, now I would like you to start your presentation. Thank you.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. The topic today is quite complex. I'm talking about the triarchic relationship between teachers' cognition, pedagogy, and assessment in university education. So my name is Maya Gunawardana. I'm an assistant professor at University of Canberra. And let's get started. All right. Before I begin, it's a tradition in Australian universities and particularly in Australia to begin with these acknowledgements. University of Canberra acknowledges Ngunnawal Ngambri people who are the traditional custodians of the land upon which the university is located. We pay our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, Indigenous peoples, past, present, and future. Acknowledge that this land from which we benefit has an ancient history that is both rich and sacred. This is the webinar overview today. First of all, going to begin with unpacking the definitions of critical thinking. Next, I move on to exploring the taxonomies of critical thinking and to examining the assessment strategies. Then we move on to revisiting triarchic relationship, which is the topic of this presentation. And finally, we will see the future directions. I'll give you some time for question and answers. Hope everything's okay with you now. Let's begin. All right. Before I begin, I want you to do a tiny little task. It's just a very small task for you. Please take 2 minutes to write your definition of critical thinking on a piece of paper and start with, I think critical thinking is. So I'll give you 2 minutes and I'm timing here and let me start my clock. Thank you. This is your time to write the definition of critical thinking. All right, thank you. Please keep your definitions, hold on to your definitions, and let's move on. All right, what is critical thinking? This is quite complex, and answering this, you may have found it difficult. It's a messy concept. Why do I say so? Because there are certain other concepts that overlap with critical thinking. For example, some people use critical thinking for analytical thinking or for holistic thinking, reflective thinking, intuitive thinking, rational thinking, creative thinking, lateral, and self-regulated thinking. There are many other terms that I may have not mentioned here, but some, of course, use these just in form of in an equivalent context to just say critical thinking, just to say that critical thinking is very similar to holistic thinking or any other type of thinking that I have just mentioned here. So therefore, it's a messy concept. People find it difficult to distinguish between these different types of thinking that we use in synonymous ways. There's another issue with defining critical thinking. The problem with designing critical thinking is, or defining critical thinking is, that critical thinking resides in two different domains. What are the two different domains? Critical thinking resides in academic disciplines. Examples like engineering, critical thinking in engineering, critical thinking in business, critical thinking in literature, critical thinking in any other, or history or geography, or different types of disciplines as a disciplinary domain kind of thinking. And researchers seem to identify critical thinking as different concept in engineering, different concept in geography. At the same time, researchers or practitioners same time introduce critical thinking in very generic terms. In generic terms mean just as a general skill. So these are the two difficulties or two complexities that we see in defining critical thinking, that we find in defining critical thinking. So there are some definitions that I have drawn for your attention here. One by Ennis, which is one of the popularly used critical thinking definitions. Reasonable, reflective thinking, focused on deciding what to do or believe or do, what to believe or do. So it's kind of, in a way, before I explain to you about critical thinking in a synonymous term, that reflective thinking, as we see here in Ennis' definition, that it's overlaps. There is an overlapping here, but still it's a valid definition, very widely used definition. Another definition that I have mentioned here or stated here is that it is a cognitive skill or mental ability or ability to sort of use for a purpose or a reason or a goal-directed purpose. It's kind of thinking involved in problem solving or making inferences or looking for making informed decisions. So this is sort of the definition that Halpern, one of the researchers from critical thinking domain, discusses here. So, and another one, which is the last one that is stated in this slide, is the work-related definition. The definition that is provided in the workplace. So it is a skill that exercises sound reasoning and analytical thinking. So it's kind of using knowledge and facts and data to solve workplace workplace problems. So this is a workplace definition for critical thinking. So as we see, there are no such consensus definition here, but there are lots of definitions that we need to draw on to understand critical thinking. One of my favorite is this definition. I know there are students, you might find this definition a bit complex. This is a definition by Bourdieu and Valaquant. It's kind of complex. It's unthought categories of thought which delimits the thinkable and predetermine the thought, which is complex. It's hard to understand Bourdieu. If you don't kind of comprehend this, please don't worry. Bourdieu's definition is quite complex, but I have just simplified the definitions for your understanding here. The critical thinking here, based on Bourdieu's definition, is a new idea of a particular topic that's different from any other thought, or it's a kind of a unique new idea that is generated from whatever thinking that we previously mentioned. Reflective thinking can lead to this new idea. Analytical thinking can lead to this idea. So there are numerous ways that this new idea can be drawn. This new informed, reliable or universal idea can be considered as this critical thinking based on Bourdieu's. It's uncovering the unknown. What is unknown? What's not known? So that's quite simple. I mean, easy to understand. It's kind of makes sense compared to all the other definitions that we have looked at. So another explanation that Bourdieu uses here is connected to show social and impersonal view that can be relevant or believable, informed by evidence. So critical thinking is something not personal, not just individual. It's something universal, the idea that is applicable, believable universally. So that's something that Bourdieu's definitions allowing us, or sort of helping us to move on towards the definition, understanding the definition of critical thinking. All right, so it's, I'm sorry if I'm a bit fast. I mean, this topic is quite complex, so we can slow down. You may listen to this recording if you are having trouble trying to comprehend a lot. I know I'm trying to explain a lot here, drawing a lot of examples, and this time is quite not good enough for me to explain in detail, giving you some examples so that you can clearly see the definition of critical thinking. All right, so these are some highlights from my paper, the paper that we published, my colleague and I, in 2021. I can give you access to this paper after the presentation. I can send you a copy of this presentation. After this, copy of the paper after this presentation. So you can have a look at the teachers or academics or professors in university in Australia describe what critical thinking is. So it actually makes sense. It's showing that critical thinking is divergent, like it's a new idea. It is not something, as you see from the first quote here, it's something new. It's not from what you knew already. It's taking something new, drawing something new. So this is this new concept. So novel, the idea that is novel is something that was dominant in my interviews with teachers when I did my study about critical thinking. So, and at the same time, in the second one, it's actually application of knowledge in a creative way, how we apply knowledge in a creative way. So that is also critical thinking. So if you see from the second example, engineers has to take what the clients want, but then put the idea in a creative way and surprise the client with something creative. So that's what how the engineers would use critical thinking in their jobs. When they're doing their jobs, they use something available to come up with something new, something really valid, something really surprising, something really interesting, something novel. So this is sort of the definition the definitions that I have used, kind of giving us directions to understand critical thinking. So next of my presentation is to show you some taxonomies for critical thinking, not the definitions. How do we develop critical thinking? So I'm using some taxonomies from literature. You are very familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, which is leading towards critical thinking. So Bloom's taxonomy, you start with something simple, you remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. So this is sort of the apex. Critical thinking is at the top part of this taxonomy. So you can't just have critical thinking when you don't know something. So you need to have that basic knowledge, understanding, then application and analyze, evaluating, have the critical thinking at the apex of the taxonomy. So this is kind of how we develop critical thinking, one of the taxonomies that are quite dominantly used by teachers, school teachers, university teachers to develop critical thinking. There's another taxonomy by Ennis. This taxonomy is not linear. The Bloom's taxonomy is linear, but as you see here, this is quite broad, and also the skills, different skills are emerging from different directions, when particularly in problem-solving context. As you see, problem-solving context, you gather information and then you make inferences and you make sure things are very clear. So lots of avenues, lot of aspects to critical thinking. Critical thinking is not just one thing. So as you see from this Ennis taxonomy, it shows you the complexity, the holistic nature of critical thinking. Critical thinking is just an umbrella term that involves all these processes. Another one, which is another linear one, is Mazzano 2001 taxonomy, going from simple to complex. You start from simple, very similar to Bloom's taxonomy. It helps you with moving up, like how you develop your lower order skills and then higher order skill gradually by looking at the skills, by developing the skills, focusing, gathering, remembering skills, organizing skills, analyzing skills, generating, integrating, evaluating. And at the end of this process, critical thinking is something shining there, something that is new, something that is surprising, emerging from the process of critical thinking. Another one is Robert Sternberg's definition, or sorry, not the definition, it's the taxonomy. The taxonomy here, you see that the very similar, it is also in comparison to other ones, some are linear, some are from 360-degree angle, that they are a bit holistic, like you complex taxonomies. So this is different strategies that students need to develop, metacognitive skills, thinking skills, learning, knowledge, and then at the center, then after getting all that, they are able to develop their critical thinking. So different processes are there in developing critical thinking. So it's quite holistic here. Another definition, sorry, I'm still talking about definitions. Taxonomy of critical thinking is, which is quite popular, helpens. These are, I mean, all these researchers, most of these researchers are from psychology disciplines, but some are from education and all sorts of disciplines. Critical thinking is quite generic across disciplines, so people use these taxonomies widely in education context. And this definition by Halpern, as you see, there are other sets of skills are highlighted: argument analysis, the analyzing the literature, verbal reasoning, being able to reason, and decision making, problem solving, hypothesis testing. I think Halpern's definition, once again, is quite 360-degree angle. Lots of skills are interchanging, exchanging, and developing while developing critical thinking. So these processes actually are conducive to developing critical thinking. These processes lead to develop critical thinking. So that's sort of the understanding we are developing. All right, let me now again pause and ask you to reflect on your understanding, and maybe now come back to your definition, the definition that you wrote at the very beginning. And please reflect, modify your definition in 2 minutes. Start. You start with, I used to think CT is this. After listening to Maya, I think critical thinking is this. What idea, what new idea did you get? I'll give you some time, 2 minutes once again, to reflect on and your previous definition and modify your definition again. Thank you. Here's time for you. Okay, thank you. Let's leave your questions or whatever problems or confusions you have to the question and answer time and move on. Thank you. So the key messages from the discussion that I have been, that we have been having so far are: CT is a process, not a product. critical thinking is a product. It's not a product, it's a process. It is an outcome or byproduct of the taxonomy, so byproduct of that process. So critical thinking comes at the end, that new idea, but the process is most important in learning and teaching. The process can vary based on the task, event, the purpose, or the problem, or simply the discipline. So teachers need to be mindful of the process, not the end product so much. So the teachers and the students also, when they get feedback from their teachers about their critical thinking, they can think about the developing nature of critical thinking. It's a continuum. The critical thinking shapes as you learn, or even everyone's making sense of the world when they are exposed to education, when they're exposed to knowledge construction, knowledge and understanding. They develop their understanding at the same time they develop their critical thinking. So let's move on to now the assessment of critical thinking. Now that, as you see, it's not can be challenging. So it's actually, is it measurable? Can we assess critical thinking? And formative assessment strategies that you can use to assess critical thinking as teachers, and students also can demonstrate critical thinking by various means. So, as I said before, multiple dimensions of critical thinking make it complicated to measure. And it's very important thinking. So it's important to monitor students' thinking, the teachers' constant monitoring. Students' constant monitoring of critical thinking is the most important in the assessment. So, and at the same time, how do they translate critical thinking in their verbal, in their language? So this is also quite complicated. If they're writing in or learning in English, if their language is, if their mother tongue is a different language, so how do they communicate that message? So these are some interesting areas, interesting aspects that teachers and students need to understand when measuring critical thinking. They may understand, we may not be able to see that visible thinking. Thinking may not be visible in their writing, in their essays, in their the reports, or what did the students write. So visibility can be a problem. So there are some models to assess critical thinking. So Paul and L model is quite widely used. So when you think about that new idea, as a product, not as the process, clarity of that idea or the clarity of the process, you also can measure the process, precision, rigor, the depth, relevance, fairness, and logic. So this is quite interesting that we see. These are some criteria that we can use to measure critical thinking, evaluate critical thinking. So I won't go further into this because I'm conscious of the time, but let's move on. Sorry, I think there was an interruption, so I may have to go back again. Am I right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, sorry. I think am I still sharing the slides?
No, ma'am.
No, right? Yeah, thank you. Let's go back to where we stopped. Sorry, that's technology. All right, so dynamic assessment. Dynamic assessment is that different ways that we use sorry, I think we'll go back. Yes, dynamic assessment is the concept that we do not necessarily have one type of assessment, but we do have different types of assessment, different means of assessment, series of assessment to help evaluate students' critical thinking through different techniques, not just one test, knowledge test or something, but different types of assessment to assess students' critical thinking. So we could use dynamic assessment, and if you want further detail, I'm very happy to pass this on to you. This is what I mean by triarchic relationship. Let me explain to you very clearly what I mean by triarchic relationship. Teacher's cognition, teacher understanding what critical thinking is, helping teachers to develop teaching approaches to help students to learn critical thinking. When teachers use appropriate teaching approaches, an assessment leads to measuring critical thinking. When teachers understand these processes very well, they actually impact on how teachers address critical thinking in students' learning. Students also can use this as to help. I know I'm aware that there are students in this presentation. If you think about your understanding of critical thinking, helps you to demonstrate critical thinking in different ways and means in your practice. So my presentation initially is developed for teachers, but realizing that there are students, this relationship can also, triarchic relationship, your understanding of critical thinking, leading to your practice and how you demonstrate critical thinking in your application. So this is the triarchic relationship that I'm emphasizing here in this presentation, which is the title of our presentation. So hope you can understand. If you do, then I have done my job well. But as I said, this is a very short presentation. The topic is complex, and communication in distant learning is not as good as we think. Of course, we try our best. That's what we can do. But these are some really interesting ways that we can develop critical thinking, creating a culture of critical thinking in our day-to-day learning. How we do that? Teachers can help students to think, scaffold thinking. Engineers, if you are an engineer, how do you think critically in engineering? How do you help the students to think critically in engineering, problem solving? So you can scaffold the thinking for students to learn. So developing that culture, talking, making that thinking visible in your learning and teaching, we can create a culture of thinking. This Harvard University Zero Project has provided a lot of thinking routines. These are some core thinking routines and also how to think when you are solving a problem. So there are lots of thinking routines that teachers can use in their teaching. So to develop this culture of thinking, we can create or use these routines in our day-to-day classroom. Students also can think of what procedures are there in solving problems. So, and different ways that we arrive at coming up with solutions. So what are the routines? What are the dispositions of our thinking? So when we develop dispositions, we are ready to move on as learners, as teachers, as citizens of the country. But these dispositions, thinking routines, need to be developed in school, in university, in educational context. So that's my argument. So that's my final message to you. And so next is the paper that we have published. This is a paper that we published, my colleague and I published through a study. It's one of the interesting, everything that I talked about here, you may be able to read and expand your understanding. So feel free to have a go at reading and understanding what we are trying to say. And if you have any questions, please contact me or my colleague. All right, that's all for today. I think time is quite good. And this is time for question and answers. I welcome your questions now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now the forum is open for question answer session. Students can opt one of the two options. Either they can write their question in chat box or they can raise your hand as well.
Nosheen, I can see you raising your hand. Yes. Maybe your microphone is mute.
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yes, of course. Loud
Thank you
and
so much,
clear.
ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. I'm Noshin Rana from Wakand. First of all, I would like to say thank you. You have delivered so well. Your style is so interesting that I have tried to understand everything that you were saying. It was such a wonderful lecture. Thank you so much. Ma'am, I want to ask.
My pleasure.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. I want to ask one thing. The strategies that you were referring to, that we can promote our students, or we can encourage our students to think when we are delivering lecture. So problem in our setup is that we have number of students, like we have 25, 35 students in one class, and we don't have enough time to let them they definitely are thinking, but we don't give them time to express their thinking. So sometimes they do control their thoughts, and they do not express themselves. So how can we manage to like encourage our students to think and speak within 1 hour lecture, or within maximum 2 hour lecture? So how can we do this thing practically?
Nosheen, thank you very much. That's a wonderful question, and that's not a challenge that you experience. That's a challenge that I experience as a teacher. That's very common, that all teachers across the world experience very similar problems with large number of students in classes, and also a lecture like this one limited to 1 hour. How are we going to do this? I think it's not as easy as we say. However, as I said, like, one of the examples that I use here in this lecture, I'm not sure whether you found it useful, is to the one that I just say, right to critical thinking. What do you think? I used to think. I think critical thinking is, towards the end, I say, I used to think it is this. Now I think. I'm kind of getting that thinking visible. So there are different ways that we could use strategies. That's just one simple example that I used here in the lecture to give you some time to think and express your idea, and also for you to listen and change your understanding. Now I think. I was just wondering, because this is not a large crowd as I expected, I would like to ask, did you find that strategy useful? I'm asking the audience. Anyone can respond. I can come back to Nosheen again if you tell me, did you find that useful?
Yes, ma'am. I was unable to unmute my mic. That is why I couldn't say. Yeah, ma'am. It was really very nice. At least I started thinking that what critical thinking is. I mean, this practice was really wonderful. I practically thought what critical thinking is, and I am thinking to use this strategy in my lectures as well.
All right, thank you. Is this Nosheen again?
Yes, ma'am, I am Nosheen.
All right, okay, yeah, thank you. So now, Nosheen, this slide that I am showing here, this one, Zero Project, there are some other strategies that you can use. If you go
okay, ma'am.
If you go to this link, there are some other strategies that I use in my teaching, and you can use other strategies, some of the other strategies here listed. These can be used in university, secondary school, primary school, across all sectors of education.
Okay, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Ma'am, I would also like to appreciate you. That was a very fruitful presentation. We have another question from Sir Rashid. He asked that what laws are there to govern teaching cognition to human society?
Can you please repeat the question?
Yes, ma'am. What laws are there to govern teaching cognition to human society?
Cognition. The second word is not very clear. Are you talking about this? Cognition?
Ma'am, to human society.
Cognition to human society. Of course, cognition is something that we always like. Cognitive thinking, knowledge, understanding, thinking style, metacognitive skill. That's what we deal with in education. All the time we try to teach knowledge. Knowledge is just information. Understanding is how that information is used. That's a cognition. And think about thinking, cognition, and metacognitive skills, also like thinking about thinking. Once again, it's these things we teach in different ways. We start from primary education, secondary education, and tertiary education. And education, these cognitions could be taught, like, developed through education, formal education, but also through various other means that we do, like informal education, from exposure to different other projects and inquiry learning. So it's quite differently we can teach this cognition, knowledge, skills, and metacognitive skills to human society. I'm sorry if I have answered the question. If I have not answered the question well, that's what I understood from your question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. There is another question from Abdullah. He wants to ask, what should be a roadmap to avoid conflict while arguing critically?
Say it again. I'm sorry, I'm trying to comprehend the question.
What should be a ma'am, it's in chat box. What should be a roadmap to avoid conflict while arguing critically?
Arguing?
Critically.
Let me have a, okay. So some of these taxonomies that we used, I mean, there is no one way to do this. There is no one way to do this. As I said, there are different ways of means of developing arguments. Like, for example, you start with understanding, comprehension, knowledge, understanding, and thinking beyond, and then moving towards different ideas. That these taxonomies are sort of the ways that we can develop this kind of thinking. So it won't happen automatically. Teachers need to work hard helping students to develop, or even we have to work hard, like not rather in education context. If we are just people who want to apply critical thinking, develop our critical thinking, we need to try hard, knowing, reading. For example, when I don't understand something, when I have something that I don't know, I go and first of all read. And then I read another article, and listen to something. So then I synthesize, gather information from all those ways, and then I create my own opinion, my own idea through how I understand this. Sometimes my opinion is not static. It will change time to time, and then it will continue to change in the sense, kind of revise. We don't really have hold on to one idea. in this world, we are evolving every day. If I have answered the question, otherwise I might be able to write down the answers. If you email them to me, I'll be able to write good answers for you if my talking is quick and if I did not necessarily translate how I understood your question and my answer.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, there is another question from Sir Rashid. He wants to ask, does cognition exist outside the life that in its very nature is concrete, material, and practical process?
Yes, it does. It does. It does. It does exist. And at the same time, there is research that particularly in early 50s, research about human brain is wired to have that and human brain is sort of wired to develop those brain pathways. It's already when the child is born. So it's already there. Even without particular education, people develop cognition. You might think about a farmer who hasn't been to a school, who hasn't been to school or gone to university, but using that ability or cognitive powers, cognitive abilities to create new things, use things critically, create. So that's does not necessarily exist within the domains that we talk about, but there are other domains, other avenues that the cognition exists. Even when the baby is born, how creative our babies are. Where do they get that from? Creativity. I think we kill their creativity when they come to school by trying to teach.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
There is another participant, Nadir Jan. I guess he wants to ask a question. Yes, sir, please.
Thank you so much, ma'am Maya. It was a wonderful lecture, and I was really entertained when I got of lecture. I would refer to the question of Miss Noshin that since we have 20 to 30 students in the class, and in addition to that, we have a specific syllabus. So those students who repeat the syllabus reproduce the answers which we teach in the class, which is actually a social indoctrination. How can we evolve critical thinking in them when we have specific time and we have to finish the course outlines as well? Thank you.
That's a wonderful question. And it's a very common problem that many countries deal with because of the state-sanctioned curriculum or university prepared curriculum or ready-made curriculum. But I think as a teacher, we have to be creative and innovative, how to enact the curriculum based on what we know how we should teach. Because Australian teachers are quite independent. They take the subject, they do not necessarily regurgitate the students like we do in Sri Lanka and in other Asian countries. They do not necessarily write notes, but they inquire, they develop inquiry learning. So the knowledge is constructed rather than given. In our Asian context, we try to give knowledge, pour knowledge. We are still using traditional approaches to teaching. I think we need to use modern approaches to teaching, rather get the students to construct, not think about the end goal, right? Kind of this is covering the syllabus. That's a huge dilemma. That's a huge problem. Why do we need to cover the syllabus? What is the purpose of covering the syllabus? If the students are not learning and developing their thinking, we are not producing good learners. I think we need to change that approach.
Ma'am, teaching the syllabus for Cambridge University, even they have given the course outlines which are specified, and we are given 130 credit hours, and within that time period we have to complete all the course outlines. So we have a limited time period to complete all that, and in addition to that,
Yeah.
we have to assess the students on that syllabus which we have imparted, which we have taught. Those students who are reproducing the same answers which we have taught them, they are granted the grades. So instead of imparting them critical thinking, they are reproducing time and again.
I would say that's appalling. Whatever university you work for, that's appalling. That's not quite the right approach. But I would say that even I teach a syllabus, like, I do have my content to cover, but we in our faculty design understanding by design module. We use understanding by design. We design to develop understanding in a way that they do not necessarily reproduce, but they come up with critical thinking. I think as teachers, we need to strategize the teaching approach. Students don't know what they need to know. So teachers need to equip those strategies that I was talking about, and different other strategies, dynamic assessment, and different other strategies to make that critical thinking, that visible thinking culture. You could use, even though you have 1 hour lecture, I can show you the things that I do if you do give me some time to show me my one of my online design courses, where I don't think I do have time here, but I have linked all the tasks to different thinking activities. I give them thinking questions. Thinking questions are open-ended, not close-ended. So I make sure that that happens in my teaching. It's a very dominant problem. I am with you. I'm sharing your thought. Thank you. And I'm pleased to see that I have such a really motivated, interested audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was really wonderful to be part of this lecture. You were really good at your delivery. You were really excellent in your communication, and whatever you delivered, it was simply awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your wonderful feedback. Thank you. And of course, there is another slide here. If you please go to this link, feedback and comments, you can give, not comments, rather feedback. I have used this online feedback system for you to give me feedback, but your questions are welcome, and I'm not sure about the timing and of the presentation. And my paper, please read my paper.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So now I would like to invite Dr. Maya again for concluding remarks.
Thank you very much. How long is this for, Doha?
Ma'am, it's 5 to 8 minutes.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome, ma'am.
So, okay, let me come back to my key slides, because I don't think I kind of prepared concluding remarks. One of the slides here, my concluding, CT is a process. Critical thinking is a process. It's not just process. Teachers need to strategize the process to develop critical thinking. It does not necessarily end up with a tangible product, but it'll end up with a new, wonderful, creative idea that is specific to a particular age. Like particularly in primary school, that new idea is surprising for that age. That student's critical thinking is a continuum. It's a developing. It's continuously developing. So teachers need to have that patience and tolerance and appreciation for students doing that, coming up with that kind of creative ideas and going through the process. The problem with sometimes is that teachers are impatient. Teachers do not have that level of tolerance to give students that time. They think that, oh, I need to cover, I need to complete. I would rather say I complete one thing rather than everything, allowing students to think and wonder and find out, inquire. I think that is more useful than just us doing a lecture for 1 hour. So I would say that lecturing approach is not quite appropriate. So lecturing is quite, hello, I'm sorry I lost you for a moment. I think my concluding remarks are everywhere in the world that we are not necessarily doing very well in regards to critical thinking. We need to be doing better every day, try strategies for students developing critical thinking skills, because we are moving into very different world and we don't know what we are meeting in our future world. I mean, think about this COVID and we never imagined. So we are moving towards an unimagined world. So critical thinking skills is one of the most important skills that students should develop. So we need to hone our students' skills. From primary schools, we need to get students to think. We need to stop teaching at them, get the students involved in learning, put more emphasis on them working towards their learning. I think a traditional approaches to teachers talking at them for 1 hour or 20 minutes, it's not going to help students to learn. They only learn because of their extrinsic motivation, but the students are intrinsically motivated. They become exploratory learners. So let's create our learners exploratory. Thank you.